Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Junkyard Dawgcast. I'm your host, Jordan Hill. Got Ben Wolk with us on this Tuesday afternoon as the Georgia Bulldogs get ready to go through Tennessee Tech Week. The Bulldogs passed their first test on Saturday against Clemson. Big 34-3 win over the Tigers, and now they turn their sights to the Golden Eagles. Ben, before we really dive into this, hey, we've made it through the first week of college football season. What'd you think of what we saw, and how's it feeling as we get this season moving?
Well, it felt great. Week 0 was the perfect appetizer. I thought the week 1 slate was great. I know that we personally got to be at one of the bigger marquee matchups of the weekend, which was fun to watch. And then I think we got out of the stadium in time to be able to enjoy some of the weekend's games as well, which was nice too. So yeah, I mean, it's just great for it to be back. And then, obviously for us and anybody that's getting to listen to this, that's going to get to be in Sanford Stadium on Saturday. I know a lot of people are itching to get back into a home environment, and I know I am too.
Yeah, it should be fun. Before we turn our attention to Tennessee Tech, let's wrap up Clemson. And I want to start off and say, hey, if you listen to that post-game podcast, you are a trooper because the audio did not come through for us. That one's on me, your producer. But we got quality control on it. If we record again, we know how to avoid that. So wanted to apologize for the audio quality. But and a shame, Ben. I thought we really nailed that breakdown of the game. Of course, the technology had to fall through for us.
Yeah, I think it was our best podcast yet. So I think it's unfortunate that nobody was able to listen to it because I know I was pretty proud of my takes after the fact.
They were all perfect and they were all accurate.
Mm-hmm.
I can assure you
You'll
guys
have to
of
take
that.
our word for it.
Yeah, exactly. That might actually be the best case that we can just say that. But all right, let's a few days removed now from that 34-3 victory. What has still stood out to you and what has still kind of stayed with you? And I'll start, Ben, and say I don't think in the moment I realized how many different receivers Georgia used. They had seven. Carson Beck completed passes to 7 different receivers in the first half alone. Wound up completing to 9 different receivers on the whole. But I mean, to me, the biggest takeaway from a few days removed from it, from being able to go back and rewatch the game, I mean, they are just super deep at receiver. And, I thought that there was a real chance that could happen. But to see London Humphreys, to see Lawson Lucky, to see some of those guys, Arian Smith, having the most receptions among this receiving core, that's what has kind of still stood out to me, kind of stayed with me a few days later. What has sort of stood out to you? What do you sort of keep going back to after that week 1 game?
Well, I talked about this a little bit on the immediate post-game pod that nobody could probably hear what I had to say. But in the rewatch, it stood out to me too. Just, everybody wants to see that 21 version of the Georgia defense. And I think that you're never going to see that exactly just because of how many NFL guys and high-end NFL draft guys were in that front 7. But I think when you look at this Georgia defense, the pivot to Dan Jackson and KJ Bolden at deep safety and Malachi Starks at star, I'm not going to say that I think Janelle Aguero got Wally pipped. I think that Janelle Aguero still has a chance to be in the rotation. He was projected to be the starter at star there on Saturday if he wasn't injured. But I think that if you trust Dan Jackson and KJ Bolden to the extent that it seems like they do after week 1, Malachi Starks at star is a dangerous weapon for this Georgia defense. And I think in a way that no Kirby Smart defense has really had a playmaker at that position, that you're going to get into some matchups where the other team's going to feel like they have to attack that spot. And Malachi Starks is going to make a lot of people pay. We already saw that happen on Saturday. I think that there's a, chance that they give that look more going forward. And I just think that when you look at the defensive backfield paired with those linebackers, who I think that this linebacker group is as talented as any that Georgia's had under Kirby Smart, if they can get some of those guys back, Jordan Hall, Xavier McLeod on the interior defensive line, this Georgia defense, I think, has a chance to be in the conversation. I don't want to say 21 defense, but I think that you're looking at, this might be the second best Georgia. I think this might be a top 2 defense that you're looking at in the Kirby Smart era. And if Michael Williams can get back fully healthy and Jalen Walker continues to be the weapon that he is, and Warren Brinson gets healthy, and some of these freshmen start coming along. Georgia talked about it today. They played 13 freshmen in this game. And that's an incredible number for a place like Georgia that gets negatively recruited with how hard it is to get on the field early at Georgia. And you start looking at Joseph Jonah-Ajonye, Jordan Thomas, some of these freshmen, Quatavius Johnson in the front seven that got run in their first ever game. And I think that there's a lot of depth there for Georgia to build on going forward.
Something that I don't think I even realized in the post-game podcast, and part of it, to kind of go inside baseball, the very end of these games, we're riding swords, we're trying to push them really quick. I totally missed that John Jackson got in the game, playing left tackle. I did not see that coming against Clemson. I thought it would be hard for him to get on the field at all, but to get those guys out there, I thought, especially with it being John Jackson, that at least has to inspire some confidence when you think long-term about him and his potential.
Yeah, for starters, I was watching the dog walk as they were coming into the stadium on Saturday, and you see a lot of big humans at Georgia. Like you see freshman Daniel Calhoun come through, you see Xavier Truss, you see Monroe Field, like you see big guys coming through in the dog walk line. And then you see John Jackson come through and you realize how much bigger 6'10" is than everybody else that Georgia's got, which is crazy. And there was a photo, and I think he was standing next to Jamal Merriweather. I think Jeff Santel was the one that posted the photo just to give a nod to him at Dog Nation. But I think that the photo was Jamal Merriweather standing next to John Jackson, and it makes you realize real quick, like there is basketball tall and then there's football tall, and John Jackson is a different kind of tall standing on a football field. And again, I would not have anticipated him to be someone on the field week one, but the fact that you're getting guys that are barely even football players playing in a week one top 15 matchup, I mean, that's going to set you up well for the future.
Absolutely. Well, Ben, before we turn to week two, let's talk just a little generally about college football in week one, and I'll kind of leave it open for you. What stood out to you across the college football landscape? Anything, any results that you feel like kind of taught you a little bit about certain teams going into this season?
Well, I mean, I think that there were some clear winners from the weekend. And I think that I feel like, at least looking at this week one slate, you start to realize how the 12-team playoff sort of changes the way that you look at all of this. And you see a team like, I'll give an example, like Miami, for instance, that boat races Florida. And I know a lot of people listening to this probably loved getting to enjoy that game after the Georgia game was sort of out of reach. And a team like Miami, you see Clemson falter, you see Florida State's now faltered 2 weeks in a row. You look at that Miami schedule and you say, can you find 3 losses on here? And if you can't really find 3 losses on there for an ACC team, like there's a good chance that Miami, I don't want to say has punched their ticket to the playoff because there's a lot of ball left, but you're looking at it and you're saying, man, that's a really good situation for that program looking forward. When you look at their schedule, you look at the teams that they're going to be competing with for the conference title. I think that that's a team that's a clear winner. I think that a team, and this is maybe a little bit of a weird one, but Penn State is a team that they've always gotten the sort of raw end of it because they lose to Ohio State, they lose to Michigan, and everyone says that it's a failed season. Going 10-2 in that league this year is not a failed season. And yeah, they've thrown some teams like USC, who had a good weekend, obviously, as well, onto their schedule. But Penn State, I think, proved that they've got a lot of talent. That, I thought AJ Harris played a really good game for Penn State on their defense on Saturday. They took it to a West Virginia team that I think they were a popular pick. I actually think West Virginia plus 8.5 was the most picked game in Caesar Sportsbook last weekend. And I think that Penn State showed pretty quickly, like, hey, this is a team that doesn't lose to anybody but the elite teams. And I just think it's interesting that there's some of these fringe teams that would not have really been in many 4-team conversations this early in the year, that now you look at them and you say, man, it's going to be hard to beat a team like that. I think Notre Dame fits firmly into that category as well. You look at Notre Dame's schedule. Can you find 2 or 3 losses? It's hard to do. And when you do that, you say, all right, that's a team that feels like it's early. I don't want to say punch their ticket, but definitely earmark their ticket to the playoffs. And so I think that it was interesting to watch some of that play out and some of the teams that you now look at and say, all right, I think that they're carving out 2 to 3 of those 12 spots. Who else is going to fill out the rest of it?
Yeah, some of those teams you can at least say are well positioned just based off what they did in week one. Kind of going opposite of you, you kind of talk about the winners. The thing that stands out to me is some of these teams that are in real trouble. I mean, Florida, I was someone who thought that Billy Napier would win just enough to survive this season. And I do not feel that way after week one. They just looked undisciplined. They look like the biggest thing that to me is an indictment on Billy Napier is it looks like it's the same problems. They have not fixed the things that have ailed them since he's gotten there. Texas A&M, I'm not really worried about them big picture, especially compared to like a Florida, but I thought A&M had a chance to be a sneaky, like could make the playoff. And Connor Wegman's just going to have to play better. I thought he really kind of held them back in that game. South Carolina really got lucky in not losing to Old Dominion. I don't know if you saw Shane Beamer's post game when he was talking on the field at SEC Network, but as soon as he got done talking, he turned and made a face where you just knew he was like, "This, we got some stuff to work out." And Lenora Sellers is a guy that I heard quite a bit about this offseason, and people were excited about, and he did not have a good game. And the thing to keep in mind with all this, it's 1 week. It doesn't necessarily, doom you, but it is a good picture into what you're dealing with, especially when, one of the problems with week one, and I found this when I did my SEC poll for this week, how much are you going to give a team like Texas credit for beating Colorado State 52-0, or even an Auburn beating Alabama A&M 73-3? You got to keep in mind that the competition level is very drastically different than, say Georgia playing Clemson or, USC and LSU. I mean, I think about, obviously that was tough for LSU to lose that game, but that could be a really good USC team. So it's kind of trying to weigh those factors. But I like your point about Penn State. West Virginia was a really popular pick in the pick'em that I run, and they took care of business there. It's one of those things. And then we had, I got to mention Florida State. I had Georgia Tech winning that week one game, but I was like, all right, that's kind of a flash in the pan, sort of a weird deal. You're going to Ireland. I can kind of give you a break. Surely they won't lose to Boston College. And not only did they lose to Boston College, it could have been even worse, which I was talking to somebody about this, Ben. I mean, I think the worst part of the last 2 weeks for Florida State is Boston College taking a knee on like the 10, being like, nah, we don't even need to score on you again. This game's over. I mean, to me, that hurt worse than giving up another touchdown.
Yeah, I mean, it was sort of a helpless loss where pretty quickly you started to feel like, all right, this 16.5 point favorite is not the favorite in this game. And, credit to Thomas Castellanos, a GHSA state champion. I know that a lot of people from South Georgia on our board were talking about his, Ware County background. And, he was fun to watch. And I think that Florida State's going to have a lot of trouble this season. But I also do think that Georgia Tech and Boston College showed, an upgrade on those two rosters. And I know that Alabama folks gave Bill O'Brien a lot of backlash the last couple of years, but I thought that showed to be a really, really well-coached football team yesterday.
Yeah, with Castellanos, that's the only time Go Gators is allowed on our board. Shout out to Ware County, got some family down there, so that was definitely something worth seeing. And hey, shout out Kai Robichaux, Glenwood Gator, covered him a little bit in high school, so that was cool to see that.
Yeah, Castellanos and Robichaux has to be the best name backfield in college football right now. I'll take any nominations that beat that, but that's the leader in the clubhouse right now.
And how are they not playing for a team in Louisiana? That's Brian Kelly. You got some questions to answer.
Yeah, that actually somehow the Florida State Boston College game left Brian Kelly with even more questions to answer than he thought he had.
Tables around Brian Kelly. Watch out, because you're in danger. That's for sure. Well, Ben, let's turn our attention to week 2. Georgia comes off of that win against Clemson. Get ready now for Tennessee Tech, who, again, this is an Ohio Valley Conference team. We understand what this game is. I haven't looked at a line, but I'm sure it's at least around 40 points. But I'll give the Golden Eagles credit. They played NTSU really tight last week. Wound up giving up the game-winning drive late in that game, but Bobby Wilder, former Old Dominion head coach, been around the game for quite a while. Look, we know what this game is going to be, and the amount of conversation that we're really going to have in depth about the Golden Eagles and the Bulldogs is going to, it's not going to look the same as it did for the Tigers or any of these SEC games coming up. But this is an opportunity for Georgia to open its season at home, having the home opener, taking care of business, hopefully trying to get some younger guys involved, get them out there on the field and make sure they know what it's like playing between the hedges. We had a chance to talk to Kirby Smart, a few players on Monday. I wanted to play some clips from what he had to say, and I would say this is the most important clip, the thing that we were the most interested in, was some injury updates, and namely Michael Williams. Let's see what Kirby had to say on the injury front.
Was close to being able to play, worked out before the game. Thought he might be able to go in emergency. I don't really know today anymore. We just had a walkthrough. He walked through, and hoping he'll be able to go this week. Warren got a little bit of an ankle / contusion. Wasn't able to go. We're hopeful he's able to go. Michael has an ankle sprain. It's a grade 2, but it's stable. He'll be week to week. Probably questionable this week, but not going to be a long-term ankle, and we'll see.
And just for context, the first player he was talking about was Janelle Aguero, who had pulled a muscle, wasn't able to play, and has been mentioned a little bit earlier in this episode. That kind of led to the shift where we saw Malachi starts playing some star as well as playing some safety. Now, the biggest question there, Ben, was about Michael Williams. We saw that hit he took from Phil Maffa. In the moment, you kind of worried it was a knee. So obviously you want him fully healthy. A grade 2 ankle sprain obviously is a concern, but in my opinion, this is about the best case scenario given that injury and given the path forward for Georgia.
Well, when we started to hear that it was an ankle more than a knee, I think that alone was a reason for optimism. I think that anytime your best defensive player is, his availability is in question, it's always a bad thing. But I think that this feels like best case scenario in terms of what the result of this could be. I mean, I think that right now it's a matter of him just getting that inflammation down and getting more comfortable, putting the weight on it. I don't think that we've heard this either way. I think Kirby might have suggested this, that he's probably not he's questionable this week. I wouldn't expect to see him this week. I don't know whether you would see him next week at Kentucky or not. I mean, I think that, grade 2 ankle sprain, like just off that alone, I think you're typically looking at like 2 to 3 weeks. And so I think most people are feeling the same way. You want as full health of a roster as you can get when you go to Alabama, though I know Georgia is probably going to be sweating going to Kentucky 2 weeks before that, and they'd love to have a full roster for that as well. But I think that knowing that Michael Williams isn't going to be a long-term outing, I think that is a good thing for Georgia.
100%. And again, I think I pointed this out when he got hurt. It was a shame, especially the timing. He had just made a huge play. I think it was on Klubnik that he made a great read and made a tackle for loss on the play before. And yeah, my expectation is sort of what you laid out there, Ben. He won't play this weekend. I would be surprised if he plays against Kentucky just because you have that bye week. Rely on some of those other pass rushers, rely on a Jalen Walker, rely on a Damon Wilson for 60 minutes and let Michael get healthy because, as much as we want to talk about Alabama being different now and this being the post-Nick Saban era, and they showed on Saturday 63-0 against Western Kentucky, and I know people are going to hear that and say, yeah, it's Western Kentucky. They're a solid CUSA team. They're going to probably win 7, 8, 9 games. That's not nothing. I think that's the right strategy is let's just be cautious. Let's work him back because it's going to be where you need all hands on deck going into Tuscaloosa to try to beat what, again, is still a really good Crimson Tide team.
Yeah, I mean, Kalen DeBoer is a good, really, really, really good football coach. I'll keep saying it until everybody listening to this believes me. But I promise you that Georgia is not going to be feeling like they have any kind of coaching advantage going into that game on the 28th. I mean, Georgia is going to be treating that one like every Alabama game that they've ever treated it.
Ben going out on a limb and saying the guy who coached the national championship runner-ups last year is a good coach.
This is why he's like 12 games in his life, basically.
Yeah, this is why you're on this podcast, because you will say things that others refuse to.
I mean, that's the thing. Everyone was talking about Kalen DeBoer when they made the hire, and I just kept saying 104-12, 104-12. It's like winning's winning. I don't care.
Yeah, I totally agree. Some of the other things, a few other clips from Kirby. I thought this was interesting. He was asked about something you talked about earlier, Ben, the fact that they worked in so many guys in that Clemson game, the value of that. And I thought this was a good bigger picture conversation and discussion from Kirby about, people watching the games obviously take note when backups, when freshmen come into games. But Kirby made it clear that, that's not the be all end all within the Georgia program. There's other ways that these guys get better.
Well,
hopefully, I mean, the work they get every day in practice. I mean, I know for you guys, everything is about that small snapshot you see of the game. But for me, it's what are you going to do today? What are you going to do tomorrow? Because you're going to get 40 or 50 snaps against a really good football player today and tomorrow. And we really try to impress upon our guys, there's so much value in our practice that it's held in higher esteem a lot of times by NFL organizations than the game is. And it's not understood by the common fan that practice is more important than the game, but it certainly is here.
You didn't mean to cut you off there, Ben, but what Kirby said there reminded me of something Julian Humphrey told us back in the spring after he had flirted with going in the portal. We think he's going to transfer. He comes back, and he said that Kirby and the coaches essentially told him, "You're going to be better off staying here, working against some of the best players in the country. Obviously, you're going to have a chance to potentially start." But you're going to have to do that. And even at the worst case, if you want to go play in the NFL, you're so much better suited staying put and working and grinding in this program and just from practicing. I thought that quote that Kirby had right there was just really good insight on, the way he thinks. And I think it's a very accurate, and I would say we're guilty of it too. We pay attention when guys go in, but there's so much more behind the scenes of the work guys get in practice, the work they do on a daily basis, outside of whether or not they see the field on Saturday.
To me, this was the best peek behind the Georgia football curtain of this entire press conference. I mean, we got some injury updates and some things like that, but I think I'm glad you had asked me before which clips you should put in, and I didn't have a great answer for you. I'm really glad you put this one in because I wanted to talk about this one specifically and this is probably partially my recruiting brain and lens that I look through. I think this is very much a recruiting angle that Kirby Smart's going with because they get negative recruited. A lot of times people say it's hard to play at Georgia early on as a freshman, and there's so much depth. And there's so many people there. You got way more opportunities to play at Georgia. And I think that you've seen, one, through those Kirby Smart comments talking about practice, and then two, I saw that all of their staff was posted on social media today about how many freshmen played in the opener, to the point, and so many freshmen played in the opener that they originally put out a graphic that said 11 freshmen played in the opener, and then they've since updated it. There's 13 true freshmen that have played in the opener. And so they're clearly trying to hammer a point home with this, and there's clearly narratives out there, and Kirby Smart loves nothing more than to bust these narratives that are out there. And so I think that this is certainly one that they're talking about. I thought that you showed that clip. He also mentioned earlier in the press conference, he said 98% of your snaps football reps that you take at Georgia are happening in practice, and 2% of them are happening in the game. It's like, yeah, you want to do great things with that 2%, but that 98% is why Jalen Walker is able to, play inside and play outside. It's why a guy like Malachi Starks is able to, on a week's notice, shift in and play star because they've cross-trained him there at times and they've given him the opportunity to develop his skill set. And I think he brought up the NFL and how they view this whole thing. We were sitting right nearby the NFL scouts on Saturday, and I talked with a couple of guys pregame, just like what they're looking for, what are some things that they see with the Georgia program. And that, to me, is the difference with how the NFL views Georgia and everywhere else, how they practice. They know that the reps and the work and the development that they are getting, even in games in years that they are not getting many game reps, they know that those players are getting better as football players. And I think that when you hear about NIL and all these reasons why guys end up choosing schools, like that is Georgia's case. That is what they are selling to folks, saying, here is why you don't need to come to Georgia for top dollar, because there are all these other valuable reasons. And I think that anytime that you beat a team 34-3, and look, this was not a game that Georgia, there were a ton of snaps. Kirby talked about it today. There were, 56 snaps or something like that. And Georgia still managed to get 30 guys in on both sides of the ball, 13 freshmen. That's crazy, their ability to create that rotation. He also talked about the youth on the roster and how they feel like they're getting younger every year. I think the fact that you can get young guys in early in a season just goes a really, really long way. Against a good team, I'd like to point out, everyone wants to talk about how it's not a good team. It's still a good team. They just, they lost to Georgia.
I agree 100%. And the thing there, and even I do this as someone who follows the Georgia program, when you think about the perspective of coaches going against Georgia on the recruiting trail, my natural thought is, well, I'm going to, if I was one of them, I would be selling playing time, saying, you're not going to get that opportunity at Georgia. And Kirby Smart essentially poked a hole right through that. And I think that was really smart to dive into that and to kind of lay out how that works. Wanted to point out a few other things Kirby talked about. was asked about Micah Morris. I think he only played like 6 snaps, and I'm not quoting Kirby verbatim, but it was essentially like the guys who practice the best play. And I think that was kind of a challenge to Michael Morris, a guy we usually see in the rotation. My favorite part of the press conference, Dog Nation's Mike Griffith had just sort of mentioned in the middle of a question, like, it'd be nice to be able to get some practice availability, or I hope we get some practice availability this week. And Kirby just deadpan, keep hoping. I have not cleared the calendar for any practices this week. I don't know if you have been.
No, I have not. I actually haven't cleared the calendar for any practices since your little snafu at practice. So I think that the blame still falls on the shoulders of Jordan D. Hill, and I'll always believe that until I hear otherwise.
Once they lift it for the playoff, that's when I'll be able to sleep good at night.
That's right. My 2 running bits are Jordan ruining the Atlanta Braves and or just baseball in general, I guess, and then taking away my ability to go to practice, because everybody knows Kirby Smart would have let us into practice this week if it wasn't for you, Jordan.
You nailed it. Another clip from Kirby that I thought was really interesting. I asked him about KJ Bolden, and part of why I obviously wanted his perspective, but I kind of expected Kirby to kind of talk about, hey, he didn't do this right, or hey, the challenge of this, and the ways he wants to see KJ grow. Very complimentary of KJ and what he saw, and really KJ Bolden's development as a football player, even since he was a kid. Let's check out this clip.
Very confident. He's played more football than most seniors. He's been playing since he was 6 years old in the heart of Atlanta, in one of the toughest leagues there is to play football. And he's played up against older kids all his life. He's extremely athletic. The moment's not too big for KJ. He's very gifted athletically, but he also has great football instincts and intuition. He's been coached by his father, and he's tough, and so I think that gives him a leg up on other guys coming in, because he's just been playing football so long.
Yeah, I thought that was a really complimentary breakdown of KJ. Again, I sort of expected. Sometimes you ask about a younger player, and Kirby goes, "Well, he needs to do this," or "He's still got to get better doing this." Not a lot of that with KJ, and I thought that his play on Saturday backed up all the hype. I thought he looked great when he was out there, really physical. A lot to be excited about when it comes to KJ Bolden.
Yeah, Georgia got another one in KJ Bolden. I mean, it is, we talked about Malachi Starks a little bit and his special traits. KJ Bolden is the next one up, and I think it says a lot. It said a lot about Malachi Starks that they say, all right, Janelle Aguero's not healthy enough to go. Let's move him into the star. He can cross-train, whatever. I think it said just as much about Dan Jackson and KJ Bolden that they were willing to go that route. And I know that's not the look that they gave for the first play of the game, but that's the look that they were given for the majority of the important plays of the game. And I just think the fact that, it says a lot about Dan Jackson as well. And we've talked a lot leading up this fall camp that was the expectation from Dan Jackson. But the fact that they were willing to go and throw a guy in Dan Jackson back there that hasn't, he has dealt with some injuries, and you haven't been certain what you were going to be getting from him. And then a true freshman like that, it tells me that, like Kirby said, athleticism matters. There's a reason why Malachi Starks and KJ Bolden were able to play at safety day one like they have been, but it's the instincts that I think separate them from just the other great athletes that Georgia brings in. And it's one thing to play in week one, and we've talked about all the different freshmen that have played in week one, and it ended up being a blowout, so that probably gave some garbage time opportunities for some guys that wouldn't have gotten it otherwise. KJ Bolden led the defense in snaps as a true freshman, 49 snaps. That's crazy, the amount of trust that they have in him already. I think it's obvious, like when you go back to his recruitment, there's a reason Kirby Smart took such a personal interest in that recruitment. There's a reason they went above and beyond to flip him from Florida State when they don't always do that with every prospect. There's a reason why the buzz has been around him the way that there is. And to your point, there's a reason why Kirby Smart, when he answers a KJ Bolden question heading into week 2, he's answering it glowingly and not, there were other guys that he was asked about today that he said, these are some things that he needs to get better at. These are some areas where he had a tough day on Saturday. Those types of things did not come up with KJ Bolden because he played as good of a game as a freshman as you probably can at safety at Georgia, if not for the fact that Malachi Starks happened 2 years ago and we already got to kind of witness this. So it's just crazy that they found another one.
It is an embarrassment of riches, I would say that, and the future is super bright for KJ Bolden. Had a chance to talk to a few players on Monday. I also wanted to pass along this clip. First chance we got to talk to tight end Lawson Lucky, who had a big 31-yard catch against Clemson. Thought he looked really impressive. He's a guy that had gotten a ton of buzz, was one of the most talked about players, especially in spring practice last year. Hurts his ankle, has to have tightrope surgery, misses, I think, the first 4 or 5 games of his freshman year. Comes back, doesn't really have the impact. 2 receptions, 9 yards, a touchdown in that Orange Bowl. And, we had a chance to talk to him. I thought he was great. Thought he gave great perspective. I did want to share this clip of him talking about, what he learned playing with Brock Bowers, the best tight end in Georgia program history. What did he take away from what he got to see from Brock? I thought his answer was really interesting.
My biggest thing I learned from Brock is just how consistent you need to be an elite player. I feel like there's so many players that flash and show what they can do, but they don't do it on a consistent enough basis. And Brock was elite at that. He was the same guy every single day. And that was my biggest takeaway from him, is just being consistent.
I would imagine if you asked Todd Hartley, the greatest benefit of having Brock Bowers in that room is that all those younger guys got to see how Brock went about his business and what it took to be the best tight end in program history. I really think that is going to pay dividends for years to come, because you're going to have guys like Lawson Lucky who saw that up close. And then those guys are eventually going to become upperclassmen. They're going to set the example, and it's just going to trickle down. I just thought that was super interesting to hear, that Lawson took that example to heart. And just based on what we saw through one game, I think it's really paying off.
Definitely. I mean, I made a comment in the middle of the game that, Lawson was out there a lot, and situationally it felt like they were prioritizing him in Carson Beck's reads as well. They were lining him up at a bunch of different spots. He looks really built out there. I mean, we heard a lot of buzz about him leading up before his injury last year, and I think you're seeing some of the dividends of time, and patience paying off with that recovery. And to your point, I do think that leadership really lasts beyond the season that you're there, and I think that you're seeing that with, I think you are seeing that with the tight end room. They are sort of exhibiting some of the things that you once saw with Brock Bowers, even though he's not there. I think that in the defensive back room, there was a culture there that is now lasted, and it's passed down from year to year to year. And, guys like Kamari and Javon Bullard are not there anymore, and they were probably had things passed down from them, but you see it immediately when you talk to guys like Malachi Starks, or, I know it from talking with KJ Bolden, like that he just sort of like represents that kind of culture as well. And so, that leadership thing is huge. And the fact that you can see some of the dividends of it in years after those guys are already gone. I mean, the tight end room is the best example of that.
Before we take a break, I want to remind everyone we are having a 75% off sale over on Dawgs 24/7. It ends on Tuesday night at midnight, so make sure that you take advantage of that. All of the Stay Wolk recruiting content, all of the VIP behind-the-scenes looks at these Georgia Bulldogs as the Bulldogs gear up. And again, as we were recording, I saw the coaches poll came out. Georgia is still number one. I'm sure that's going to be the case again with the AP poll. This is going to be a special season for Georgia, and I want everybody to get on board with us at Dawgs 24/7. Come along for the ride, because it's going to be a fun one, and super excited to see where this season takes us. So we'll take a quick break, come back, talk a little bit about some of the high school action from this past weekend, some of the things we learned, and maybe a few names to know going forward for the Bulldogs. Ben, you were able to get out to some of the high school action last week. What did you get to see? What sort of stood out to you from some of the games you went to?
Well, I got to go to a South Georgia football game, which I love anytime and anytime you're in one of those like rural towns, you get to go get a nice local bite to eat before you go to the game. It just all has all the feels for me. So I love getting to do that the Friday night before the Georgia season opener. Got to see Shane Marshall, Minnesota running back commit, in Irwin County take on Zayden Walker, Georgia 5-star linebacker commit in Sly County. Shane Marshall was unbelievable. This is my first time getting to watch him play in person. He's someone that I definitely think Georgia is going to make a push for. I expect him to take an official visit to Georgia this fall. He's still committed to Minnesota, but Georgia and Tennessee are two programs that are definitely making him take a deeper look. We've been talking a lot about who's going to be the other running back in Georgia's class to pair with Bo Walker. Usmani Chroma is someone that visited Auburn this past weekend. He's going to be at Georgia this upcoming weekend. And then you look at Shane Marshall. Those are the two guys that I look at right now. And I'll be honest with you, I've seen both of them play so far this year. Came away really, really impressed with both of them. I don't think Georgia can go wrong with either option that they get at the running back position, though I probably would favor Shane Marshall right now, just in terms of how it seems like things are trending with Usmani Chroma and Auburn. Seeing Zayden Walker, I've gotten a chance to see him in a bunch of different settings as a guy. Like we've talked about leadership and some of the intangibles and character traits that are exhibited by some of Georgia's leaders. I think that Zayden Walker has every single one of those. He's just someone that I enjoy hanging out with and talking to when I'm doing interviews with him. Like he is just, I see what Georgia saw in him. I think that we've also talked about cross-training, guys that can play inside, guys that can play outside. He's exactly that. He's played mostly outside linebacker in his career, and he's playing a lot more inside this year. So I think there's been a bit of a learning curve for him getting some familiarity. I'll have a story at Dawgs 24/7 later this week talking with him just about some of his film sessions that he's done with Glenn Schumann and how that's sort of helped tailor his game and get him ready for being a little bit more of an inside guy than an outside guy. But, again, those were two guys that I got to see in person that I came away really, really impressed by. But just as you look at, we put out our Future Dog Watch article out on Dawgs 24/7 every single week. And as always, a lot of really impressive Georgia performances. The one that probably stands out to me the most is the quarterback in the 2026 class, Jared Curtis. His team won 70-0. Anytime a Georgia quarterback commit wins by 70 points, I know Georgia fans are going to love that. You look at his stat line, he only threw 10 passes, completed 6 of them. 4 of them went for touchdowns. So 4 of his 6 completed passes went for 190 yards. That was in about a quarter and a half of work. They weren't playing him much there. I'm getting some music in the background, so I apologize about that. But you look at Georgia's wide receivers, I think Tyler Williams, Talon Taylor, Thomas Blackshear, all 3 of them caught a touchdown pass in their game. This was Thomas Blackshear's first game. He was out with an injury in the first week. Week 2, 10 catches, 137 yards. Elias Williams had 11 catches. I mean, you look at some of these weapons on the perimeter that Georgia's bringing in. I think it's going to be one of Georgia's best perimeter weapons groups. When you look at Ethan Barbour, who had another big game, you look at Elias Williams, who had an 11 catch outing, you look at Tyler Williams, who's got a touchdown in both of his first 2 games, you look at Talon Taylor, who caught a touchdown in his season opener, you look at Thomas Blackshear, who had 10 catches and a touchdown in his first game, also played some on defense and recorded a pass breakup on defense at corner as well. You look at all those weapons. I mean, I don't know that there's many collection of receivers, tight ends that Georgia's brought in that I think are going to be as productive in their senior seasons as this group has been.
I don't want to put you on the spot here, Ben. Has there been any resolution to your knowledge about the Bo Walker situation? Obviously, he's been ineligible to start this football season.
He hasn't had any luck with eligibility hearings, so he's not playing yet. What his next move? I've heard some things that I'm not comfortable saying yet because I don't know the facts behind his case and what's going to be possible for him and where his options still are. But I think he's still trying to play for his senior year. I think that there are some opportunities for him to be able to play somewhere. But again, he's going to have to get cleared before he's able to do that. I'm rooting for him. He's someone that's really fun to watch. I got to see him play, his semifinal game and then state championship game last year. and he's really, really fun running back to watch. I know that Georgia would love for him to be able to get some run his senior year, and I know that Bo would love to just get out there and play some football because he's someone that really just, lives and breathes football. There's nothing, he doesn't like to do anything else. He likes to just play football. So I know this has been really hard on him. So I am rooting for him, but I don't think that there has been a resolution on that yet.
We'll make sure and pass it along if something happens. And like Ben said, we obviously want to see Bo Walker suit up during his senior season. Well, Ben, first home game coming up of the season. You mentioned before we started recording just a little bit about some of the folks who will be in town in Athens. What can you tell us on that front? Just what folks should be looking for when it comes to this first home opener for the Bulldogs?
So, yeah, I mean, I mentioned Zayden Walker. He's someone that he was on the visitors list for the Georgia Clemson game. He ended up actually going to the South Carolina game to watch his brother Jalewis Solomon play in his first career football game. He decided, I want to come to Athens for the home opener. So he'll be at the Tennessee Tech game this weekend. I just mentioned Usmani Chroma. My guess is, and I haven't gotten a full visitors list yet, check into Dawgs 24/7 throughout the week as I get confirmations on some of those. But Usmani Chroma, I would guess is going to be the biggest visitor that's on campus this weekend. He's an uncommitted running back. He's coming off of a visit to Auburn, who is trending very well off of that visit. So there's I wrote about this at the end of last month. Chroma's likely to make a decision at some point in September. There's a good possibility this is Georgia's last chance in that recruitment before he makes a decision. So I think that that's going to be a really big visit weekend. So, getting Zayden Walker on campus, getting one of the top 2 running back targets on campus next weekend definitely will be headliners, but I'm sure that there will be especially some 2026s and 2027s that will start to make their way to campus as well. I'll also note, as of Sunday night, the contact period open. So Georgia coaches can now go and see guys on the road. They can go to high school football games on Friday nights. High school guys can also now go to Georgia during the week, whatever. There were some guys that were at the game in Mercedes-Benz that then made the trip over to Athens on Sunday as well. So there was definitely some opportunistic scheduling for Georgia. It wasn't, in many cases, it wasn't just, hey, come up to Mercedes-Benz for a game. It was, hey, come to Mercedes-Benz for a game and then, hang out overnight and then go on Sunday over to Georgia once that contact period hits. So you're going to be seeing an influx of guys coming on campus more and more over the next few weeks.
As Ben mentioned, make sure and stay tuned to Dawgs247.com. He will have all the intel on who's visiting and all the talk coming out of week 2. Well, Ben, I think we would be remiss not to mention before we close out this episode, let's shout out Claude Felton, longtime football SID at Georgia. He retired, I believe that was back in January, and he's being honored with the new Sanford Stadium press box. The 400 level will be the Claude Felton level. The 500 level is the Dan McGill level to shout out and to celebrate the longtime Georgia coach and SID. Awesome to see Claude get this. I think he's going to be at the game. Really hoping that they ought to let him run this post game one more time. Always fun to see Claude, and again, super excited for him to get that honor.
Definitely. No, I mean, there's nobody that I can't think of anybody ever that has had a universal approval rating the way that Claude Felton did. So credit to him.
I'm going to ask you if you have any good Claude Felton stories, because I'll start with mine. And this is 2015. I was an intern for Dawgs 24/7. And it was the week of Georgia, Alabama. If you remember, that was a huge build up to that game, Alabama coming to Athens. And it was a situation where we weren't sure if I was going to get a credential for that game just because there were so many national people coming in. I put in for a credential. Claude said, we're going to try. And I was like, okay, I understand if I can't. And I'll just never forget that Wednesday of the Alabama week. I went up to him and I'm just like a student, I'm like, am I going to be able to go? And I just remember him smiling, and he's like, we'll get you in. And I was just super excited. Again, game wound up not playing out like most Georgia fans hoped. It kind of made for a real dreary afternoon in Athens, but that was super special. And when I think of Claude, I always think of that because that was a super cool moment for me.
When I think of Claude, actually, my favorite Claude story, like similar to that one, is probably when I was covering Auburn and they went on that Final Four run in 2019, and I was covering the basketball team, and it was actually the SEC tournament. And I think Claude was the SEC's communications representative for that game or for that tournament or whatever it was. And I went to my first press conference, and Bruce Pearl press conferences are always pretty fun to be at. So I always made sure that I could get a front row seat at those where I could when I was covering them. And Claude was the one that started doing it. And I hadn't seen him in probably 5 or 6 years from when I was a student reporter covering Georgia. And right when I sat down, he immediately, classic Claude Felton, smile, grin, kind of makes you feel like you're warm at home. He pointed at me and just immediately after the press conference came up and said, how you been, asked things about you. But it's just, he's one of those guys. Like he sees, I hadn't seen him in 5-6 years, and I was a stupid student reporter being a stupid, Auburn basketball reporter at the time, and he just makes you feel comfortable in any setting that you're in. So he will be missed, but I'm glad that he's getting the credit that he deserves for his long career as a successful SID.
No doubt about it. Little housekeeping before we end this episode. We're not going to have a beat writer on this week for Tennessee Tech. What we will probably do on Wednesday is record a live podcast. We'll probably take the first half and preview Tennessee Tech, break down what you need to know about this Golden Eagles team. And then that second half, we're going to do a mailbag. We are going to do a mailbag, and we'll take your questions both live if you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, and also from the Junkyard. So again, if you want to guarantee you get a question taken, go sign up right now. That 75% off deal. I will promise you, if you put a question on there that's within reason, that we will answer it on that Wednesday podcast. So we'll wrap it up right there. I appreciate everyone who watched this live, everyone who is listening or watching it after the fact. Again, go take advantage of that 75% off sale. That is our best sale. There will be other sales throughout this year, but it will not be better than the 75% off deal. So I encourage you all to take advantage of it. Go subscribe to Dawgs 24/7. Go subscribe to the Dawgs 24/7 YouTube. We got Kirby Smart press conferences, player interviews. We got these podcasts. And once basketball season gets started, we'll have stuff there too. Subscribe to the TikTok. A lot of stuff these last few days now that the season's in full swing, and we'll continue to do that going into the season. So for Ben Wolk, I'm Jordan Hill. Until next time, take care, everybody.